And of course that speaks to me in particular about the sort of fellowship and the sort of unity that we should know, especially in the local church, in particular, especially. Because Jesus did say to us, did he not, in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, he said that on the last night of his supper with his first assembly of believers. He said, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you." And then he said, "By this shall all men know that we are his disciples, his followers, if we love one another." And I think that's just as plain speaking as you can get. They shall know we are Christians by our love, and especially by our expression of our love in service to him and service to each other. We want to look again in 2 Corinthians tonight. We're going through the book of 2 Corinthians. We're going to look tonight at chapter 4, verse 1. Turn to 2 Corinthians, the second epistle Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. And we've given all the background over the past weeks about these two letters that we need to give. And so we'll start right in verse 1 of chapter 4, if you would, please. And I better get in the second epistle rather than the first one here. Slide is not too good up here. Okay. He says in verse 1, "Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not. We have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of the Lord." Now remember, as we said last week, and we looked in chapter 3 and we had looked at chapter 2 and so forth, that Paul is basically making reference back to the fact that some, evidently from the church in Jerusalem, had taken letters and had come to Corinth, and they were quite critical of Paul's ministry. We don't know what they were critical of about Paul, but evidently there was criticism. And from the sense you get in this letter and the previous letter, especially in this letter, the criticism was not founded on truth. They were in fact evidently spreading malicious rumors and gossip about his ministry, about him, about his sincerity, about why he preached for money, all that sort of thing. They were doing these sorts of things. And so this is connecting with that, and this is what that is saying. I was thinking this morning about this particular thing, and I was thinking the idea that we as Christians shouldn't assassinate each other. Someone has said that Christians are the only people in a battle who shoot their own wounded. You know what I mean? That's not necessarily true, but I've thought about back through my life, and I know other pastors would say the same thing, that from time to time people will go and say things. Now, let me stop here. I'm not talking about anything happening in this church, okay? I'm just talking in generalities, okay? People will go and say things, even about a pastor, that have really no foundation in truth. And people will listen to those things and form an opinion about the matter without ever asking the person who comes and says such a thing, "Why don't you go with me to the person you're talking about, and we'll find out if this is true or not." You understand? That is not love, is it? And so these people, evidently that Paul's talking about, the false teachers, the people who are being crafty and deceitful, have undermined his ministry to some degree, and he's just stating a fact. But he goes on and says, of course, this had had an effect on the gospel being preached. But if our gospel be hidden, it is hidden to them who are lost, in whom the God of this world has blinded the mind of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. Now, next week I may just take those two verses and preach about that whole thing. He goes on to say, we preach not ourselves, but Jesus Christ the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Christ's sake. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shined in our hearts to give the light of knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. Talking about he and of course the people who minister with him are people of the same sort. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Always bearing about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our body. For we which live are always delivered unto death for Jesus' sake. And of course, this was a very real thing in the life of the Christians then. They were being killed for the sake of Jesus. That the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. So then death worketh in us, but life in you. And over in chapter 11, the same letter, Paul will go through a whole liturgy, verse after verse after verse of the things that have happened to him specifically. How he's been stoned twice and left for dead. How he has been whipped 3 times with a cat o' nine tails, 39 strokes, should have killed him. How he has been shipwrecked in the deep. How these things that he makes just a reference to here were real things in his life. And so he is talking from experience. But in all of this, Paul did not lose heart. Paul did not give up. Paul kept on keeping on. Have you ever felt like giving up? On life? On yourself? On those around you? And maybe on your brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. Have you ever? I've felt that way. I read about a bus driver in New York City working for the New York Transit Company. He disappeared one afternoon. He just disappeared, and his bus disappeared as well. And the authorities in the particular transit company, they looked for him. They sent out notices. They sent out, missing persons things, and they couldn't find him. He just disappeared. About 10 days later, the manager of the New York Transit Company, he had a phone call. And he answered it, and this driver said to him, whatever his name was, and I just want to tell you that I am in Miami, Florida, and your bus is down here too. And the boss said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, the afternoon I came down here. My work shift was over, and I just thought to myself, I was so tired of the cold weather. I was so tired of the snow. I was so tired of the rude passengers. I was so tired of everything I'd been facing. I was even tired of my family. And I said to myself, what if I just drove to Florida?" And he did that. Now, I don't know the end of that story, but I can guess it. But, he gave up on life, so to speak. But maybe you have felt that way yourself. That, that you're so frustrated and so aggravated about what's going on that you maybe want to either pull your hair out or run away, or both. It might be something about your relationships. It might even be about marriage. Now, I had a couple come in this morning, a nice couple. You saw 2 visitors. And they are going to celebrate their 50th golden anniversary on August 5th, I believe it is. And she rang me a few weeks back. They live out beyond Conungra. And they have a son lives just down here, and some family. And she rang me a few weeks back and asked me if I'd consider a reaffirmation of vows here in the church, so they could say their vows again. I thought, well, this is great. I'd consider that. Besides that, I'll get a chance to witness to them. You know what I mean? They're going to come back to church. I'm going to try to share Christ with them in a very special way. So I thought, what a great thing for people to be married 50 years. And then I thought, we have been married 54 years. And I want to say, it's not always been easy sledding. It's not. And maybe you felt sometimes that, I'm sure that Mrs. White has felt in particular, like giving up on me and giving up on all of it. But you know, praise be unto God, He's given us strength to go all the way with it so far. And I want to tell you from my viewpoint, I've come this far and I'm going to keep going. And encourage Miss White. Mrs. White. But have you ever thought, I wonder what would happen if I just took a few days off of my marriage? And I heard about a man, he was telling his friend, and they'd been married many years, and his friend would ask him, what was the secret? What's the secret of the success of your marriage? He said, well, my wife and I, we've done this consistently. He said that we take time to go to a nice restaurant 2 times a week. Candlelight, soft music, and then a slow walk home after that. We've made that a practice all our married life. He said, that sounds great. He said, yes, she goes on Tuesdays and I go on Friday. Well, there are techniques, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that one. But and it might be your children. Have you ever gotten disgusted with your children? Now, we have great grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and we have a grandson, 18 years old, who's staying with us, has been with us for nearly 3 months, so I know what I'm talking about. Do you ever get disgusted with your children? Frustrated with your children? What can you do? They are adults, but they're not adults. They're always saying they're independent. I remember when I was 17 years old, or nearly 18 years old, I know I wanted to be so independent. I got to be so independent that I went and joined the armed services so I would have to... So I wouldn't have to be told what to do. And so sometimes we have difficulties along that line. 2 young men, 2 young boys. I'm just going to tell a few stories now because I feel in that mood. If you just close your ears, Mrs. Wright, okay? 2 young boys, they were giving their mom a really hard time. But one of them in particular, he had gotten to the place that he would say bad words. He would curse. And his mother was just completely overwhelmed by it. She didn't know what to do. The other boy wasn't that bad, but so they were sitting at the breakfast table one morning, and she went up to that boy, and she said to him, what would you like to have for breakfast this morning? And he said, I want some blankety blank 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 wheat mix. So she took her hand, backhanded him, and knocked him out of his chair on the floor, you know. Then she turned very quietly to the second son, and she said, and what would you like? He said, I don't know for sure, but I don't want any wheat mix. I don't know for sure, but I don't want any wheat mix. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll not try to be humorous anymore. But I think we know that there can be frustrations in marriage, there can be frustrations in family, and you can even be frustrated at work. And you can even get discouraged at work, and you can get exhausted, and you can get beyond yourself. You know what? Life, as one of our previous prime ministers said, and he copied it from someone else, life is not necessarily meant to be easy. And for Christians in particular, life has not been guaranteed to be easy. God has not said in any place that He's going to bear us along to heaven on beds of flowery ease, or that we're going to have a rose garden all down through our life. He hasn't said anything like that. We have our bills that come in the mail. We have health problems. We have hurts. We have disappointments. And we get exhausted. And all these things happen to us. I was talking to someone very, very recently, and this person had some real problems. And, you know, real difficulties, and I was trying to encourage this person. And then I started to think about my problems. And I told this person, a pastor doesn't tell all his problems to his people. No, he doesn't tell that. You know, I could just make a list now of how we are not only being challenged by little Angeline's situation, but other things in our family. Now, nothing bad in the sense that anyone doing anything bad, but just health challenges, employment challenges, of people who are close to us, and all sorts of things. We are challenged, and sometimes, you seem like you're going to be overwhelmed. And I told this person, she said, well, do you tell people? No, I said, pastors are supposed to be those who bear other people's burdens. And I said to this person that what I feel about this is that I feel I want to be exactly like Paul said he was. Paul said he wanted to be the one who would comfort other people with the comfort that God had given him in his trials, in his difficulties, in his situations. Problems just don't go away. I read of a football team coming from America. I think about gridiron, but you can relate this to rugby if you'd like, because the scoring system is similar. On record in the U.S., the greatest loss that has ever been recorded by a football team was recorded by a small university in Kentucky called Cumberland University. They played Georgia Tech, which is one of the major schools in universities. They played Georgia Tech in a football game, and they were defeated 222 to nothing. They didn't even make any yardage. But it said that during the game, one of their players dropped the ball, fumbled the ball, dropped it on the ground, and his mate said to him, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, run with it, pick it up. And, or he said, the way it was, he said to his mate, pick it up, run with it, pick it up. His mate said to him, you pick it up, you're the one that dropped it. And no one picked it up. Sometimes it seems like we've dropped the ball. You ever feel like you've dropped the ball in life? You've just dropped it. And you don't even feel like picking it up. And we've been knocked. See, Paul was knocked down, but he was not knocked out. That's the point. He was knocked down not one time, not two times, but he was knocked down, so to speak, numbers of times, and even by his own brothers and his own sisters in this church here. And that's what's tragic about it. He was knocked down, but he wasn't going to give up. He was not knocked out. He said to the church at Galatia in chapter 6, verse 9, he said, be ye not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you do not faint, if you faint not. And so he kept on keeping on. He didn't. First of all, in this chapter, I find three major things. The first thing is, we are called to remember our responsibility in the first verse. Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not. Now notice this phrase, we have this ministry. What a tremendous thing. Paul understood that he had been given a very special thing. God had done a tremendous thing to him, or for him, when he had placed his hand upon him, when he had saved him in Acts chapter 9 on the road to Damascus, when he was going to kill all God's people, and that sort of thing in Damascus. When God had then, Jesus had met him face to face, and Jesus had trained him, so to speak, and Jesus had placed him into the ministry. He says, I have this responsibility. And so we should remember our responsibility. Sometimes it's easy to forget responsibility. And since I'm in the storytelling mode, I'll tell another story tonight, okay? And this is true. This is a true story. That last one is true as well. And that is that the hospital administrator told this story at a conference once. He talked about a patient in his hospital who spilled a glass of water on the floor. And since the patient was quite ill, the next time the nurse came in, the nurse's aide came in or whatever, the patient asked the nurse's aide, would you please get something and wipe up that water? I'm afraid that when I go to the bathroom toilet tonight, I might slip on it and fall. And so the nurse's aide looked at it and thought about it, and what the patient didn't know was that the hospital had a policy written in, on paper. The hospital had a policy that if it was a small puddle of water, that the nurse's aide was responsible to wipe it up. But if it was a larger puddle of water, that the cleaner had to wipe it up. So the nurse disappeared, and in a moment or two, she came back with a cleaner with a mop. And the cleaner looked at the puddle, and the cleaner said, well, that's just a small puddle. You wipe it up. And the nurse's aide said, no, it's a large puddle. You're responsible. The regulations say, this is true. He was telling it to you. The regulations say you must wipe it up. You are responsible. And they got in the big blue, They got back and forth. And so the patient sitting there, he thought about it a while. He reached over and this large pitcher of water, he poured it all on the floor. He said, now decide who's supposed to wipe it up. You see, is that a big enough puddle, he said, for you? And so sometimes we're faced with certain responsibilities in life. Some are maybe what you call large puddle responsibilities, and some are small puddle responsibilities. And of course, we always would prefer the small ones, would we not? But it doesn't always work that way. That's not the way life is. In Romans chapter 1, verse 14, Paul said, I am a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, to the wise and the unwise. So as much as in me is, I'm ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome also. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. So Paul is saying, I feel a great responsibility. I feel this responsibility is mine because Jesus has died for me on the cross. And He saved me, and He's given me eternal life. And so I feel that God has placed upon me as a ministry of His Word, as a witness of His Word, this tremendous responsibility and yet privilege of preaching the gospel to all those who do not know about it. He not only considered the preaching of the gospel a blessing, but he considered it as a real obligation, a responsibility that no one else could fulfill. Paul had to fulfill that responsibility. And I've said a number of times, you've probably heard me say it more than once before, but I'll say it again tonight, that no one can fill your shoes in this area. That when Paul said in the fifth chapter of this same book here, chapter 5, verse 18 and 19 and 20 and 21, 20 in particular, when he said to you and me that we are ambassadors for Jesus Christ, each of us, not just me as pastor, but each of us, we are each an ambassador for Jesus Christ, and that we each are to stand in the shoes. He said this to all the members here in this church. We are to each, in essence, stand in the shoes of Jesus and cry out to the world around us, be ye, we have a ministry of reconciliation, he says, and we're all to cry out to the world around us, be ye reconciled to God. We all have that responsibility. When Jesus said to you, ye are my fishers, you are my witnesses, he was not talking about me altogether. When he said in Matthew 4:19, follow me and I will make of you fishers of men, he was talking about everyone. So we each have a personal responsibility. We're responsible. Another young man answered an advertisement for a job, and he went in for an interview, and he said on his application, and he had, of course, advertised that he needed a responsible person. And so he said to this young man, he said, you answered the ad and you said you're responsible. Tell me why you think you are responsible, that you are a responsible person. He said, well, it's this way. He said, in my previous job, every time anything went wrong, they said, you're responsible. Well, we don't need to be responsible that way. We are to be responsible. Life is not fun and games. And we need to understand that Paul is saying in this chapter, this word, that he had responsibility. And we have responsibility that God has given us, not only witnesses, not only to share the personal way with our friends, our neighbors, at workplaces and everywhere else. We need to be responsible in our homes. If you're a wife, you need to be a responsible wife. If you're a husband, you need to be a responsible husband. If you're a father, you need to be a responsible father. If you're a mother coming up to Mother's Day, you need to be a responsible mother. Whatever role God has placed us in this particular life in which we live, we need to step right, so to speak, and be responsible people. And then Paul talks about, in verse 4, he says, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. the next thing he points out, that we are in a fight. That we not only are to be responsible, that we are to be ready to do combat with a mortal, deadly, spiritual enemy. That there's a fight going on. There's a spiritual warfare going on. And we have to be ready to fight that fight. And I believe that God would want us to be ready for that. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 and 8 and 9, Peter says, be vigilant. You know what he says there? He talks about Satan. He says, Satan, be alert, be aware, be vigilant, because Satan goes about as a roaring lion. Here we go. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour, whom resist steadfast in the faith. He says, resist him, knowing that the same afflictions are accompanied in your brothers that are in the world, accomplishing your brothers that are in the world. And so he gives a warning that we are involved in combat, and we are daily required to be on our toes, so to speak, to be those of us who have been in the just difficult that might be one. You need to be alert. You need to be alert to face the enemy. I'll never forget the first time when I was in basic training, and it was 2 a.m. in the morning. The shift was. It started about 12, and I had to walk. It was the coldest night you know, and I had the old issue clothes on, and I was sitting down to the very marrow of my bones, and I'll never forget how difficult it was, because in basic training, if you were really fortunate, you'd go to bed by 11 o'clock, and 4. Otherwise, you might not get any sleep at all. And I'd been in for nearly 4 months, and I was just tired, and I never difficult it was for me to be awake. I guess I was walking in my sleep most of the time. But I knew that sometime or other that the corporal of the guard or the officer of the day was going to come around and check, and he was going to say, he was going to see if I was awake or not. I could hear corporal of the guard posting, and I'd have to respond, very minor thing, but to me it was a big deal because I needed to be alert. Sometimes in this world we really need to be alert because Satan is on the attack. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 12, we know that the Bible says that we are involved in a great struggle, spiritual spiritual powers in high places. And we've talked Scripture recently, but I'll read it again, verse 12. For we wrestle not against, but against principalities, against powers, against darkness of this world. And then God would take a sword of ready to battle with the demonic legion. So real and is our right now that only name the church, but I know more because into life and destroy. He is alive and well on planet Earth today, and he is best to destroy God's people, to destroy those the gospel out in the world in which we live. To do combat, we need to fight against. Peter said to him, and he'll flee, firm in the faith. James says in James 7, he says, resist the devil, flee from him, draw unto God, and he'll draw unto you. In chapter 4, Paul says, I forget the verse, Paul says, don't give way to Satan. To him. Keep on resisting him, keep on keeping on. And then, of course, Paul says to the church of Philippi, chapter 4, verse 13, it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So we have the power. So we don't need to heart. We need to use the big guns. The whole armor, the sword of the Spirit. We need to study our Bible. We need to pray. We need to be faithful to each other. We We need to have fellowship, as I said last episode. We need this because Satan does not take a holiday. Never takes a holiday. And just when we're on the mountaintop, so just when we think things are well, he'll flank, and that's it. Then last, we have to develop what we might call a resilience. We need to be a kid, the comeback. We need to, when we are defeated, like Paul, and he just, in verse 8, we are on every side, not distressed, but not, we're persecuted, we're not destroyed. I have a message, I haven't preached it in a number of years, but I have a message. Camp used to do a lot of youth, and we have a lot of thing from a number of, and was a champion. You know how power with the world, laid his head in the lap of Delilah. You know all that story, and how he up with his eyes punched out. He finally humiliated by the women and grinding as a burden, grinding the all that. God gave opportunity for a big comeback. What happened? Into the temple of Dagon. There were 1,000 lords and their concubines having a big feast. What's God Dagon? They took him into this big, tremendous, tall ceiling and everything else, columns that supported it. Took him in there so they could make fun of him. He was blind. He said at a proceeding, he said, leading him around, please, I'm just paraphrasing, please take me, my hands, pillows, the keystone pillow. And the little boy did it. He placed his hands on them and prayed to God to once more give him power he had before. Answered his prayer. Down, destroyed. And he all these people, Philistines that were the God, and one massive, the comeback kid, comes back. A man once too had lost his wife, very sad thing, and someone asked him, they said to him, brother, how are you doing? He said, and he said, I'm doing all right. He said, but aren't you so lonely? Said, no, I'm alone, but I'm not, because I have Savior. I have the Savior. And that's the way we should be. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, we're told by Paul that we're and by so feel the Lord God. And I read another account of two young, and I could kind of identify, because when I was overseas for nearly his wife and I were engaged. Getting more than but dear John letter. Dear John, I no longer love you. It's all off. And I you're the man. Wrote to his family, to his friend, and to his girlfriend. This is a true story. He went to the them how he was, telling him how he down, how she wanted to let him down, and he wrote, I think, Bridge, and he jumped. Another overseas in with girlfriend. It was a Dear John letter. I won't marry you. It's over with. Blah blah. You know. It was a completely different. He actually, this is a true story, wrote a song about his heartbreak, about what had happened, and last I read about it, he had made the song. He treated it differently. He bounced back. He didn't overwhelm him. And the great artist, you've heard